She arrived at the event quietly, almost blending into the crowd. The hall was filled with laughter and chatter, the clinking of glasses, and the soft hum of conversation. People moved in groups, talking in low tones, laughing, or pointing at the sparkling decorations. She felt a little out of place, carrying a tray of drinks as she weaved through the crowd. Her hands were steady, her posture careful, but inside, a nervous energy buzzed that she could not ignore. She was used to being invisible in places like this, where the attention of the room never lingered on her. Most people were focused on each other, on the music, on the event itself. She preferred it that way. Her eyes wandered over the large hall. A grand piano stood at the corner, polished and gleaming under the soft lights. It seemed almost forgotten, tucked away among tables and decorations. She had seen it earlier, but it had not mattered much to her at the time. She had been busy helping with drinks, making sure everything ran smoothly, moving quickly, so she would not be in anyone's way. Now, something about the piano drew her gaze again. She felt a faint tug in her chest. She could play, of course. She had played countless times before, in small rooms, at home, when no one else was around. But this was different. This was not practice. This was a room full of strangers, filled with expectation. Even if none of them expected her, as she moved from table to table, refilling glasses and taking orders. She noticed the pianist scheduled for the evening had not arrived. A few people glanced nervously at the empty piano, whispers passing among themselves. She could hear fragments of their conversations. "Where is he?" someone asked. "Did he say he would be here?" Another whispered. She continued her work, trying not to listen, trying not to think about it. But the tension in the room was growing. Someone needed to fill that space. Someone needed to play. The longer the piano sat silent, the more awkward the room felt. Then it happened. A guest, standing near the piano, laughed nervously and said, almost jokingly, "Does anyone here know how to play?" The words seemed harmless enough, casual even, but when she heard them, her stomach tightened. She froze mid-step, her tray still in her hands. She did not want to be noticed, and yet, somehow, every eye in that part of the room turned toward her. She could feel it before she even moved. The pull of attention, the weight of expectation. Though she knew she had done nothing to deserve it, her heart raced. Her mind flashing back to every moment she had played in private. To every time she had worried that someone would hear her and judge her for it. She had played at home. Yes, alone. Feeling the music pour from her fingers and soothe her mind. She had played in small gatherings with friends who never really listened, who smiled politely and clapped, but never understood the depth of her music. She had played in school, music classes where the teacher praised her softly, but the other students ignored her, and in competitions where she came close, but never won. And now, here she was, in a room full of strangers. Asked, though no one really asked directly for her to step forward, her hands shook slightly, gripping the tray she still held. She felt the heat rise to her cheeks. The room seemed to pause for a moment, the chatter dimming as more eyes turned toward the corner where the piano stood. She could see the expectation in their faces, the polite curiosity, the hint of doubt. They did not know her. They did not know what she could do. They only knew there was an empty piano and a silence that needed filling. She set the tray down on the nearest table, her movements careful, almost hesitant. She took a step toward the piano, then paused. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. What if she faltered? What if she played wrong? What if they laughed, or worse, ignored her completely? She had always feared being seen, being judged, being put in a position where her abilities could be exposed and critiqued, and yet something inside her whispered that she could not turn back. This moment had chosen her, whether she liked it or not. As she approached, the polished surface of the piano gleamed under the lights. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, feeling their smoothness, feeling the familiar resistance and response she had known for years. Her hands steadied slightly, her breathing slowed, and the nervous energy that had seemed unbearable just moments before began to transform into focus. She remembered the countless hours she had spent practicing, the small moments of triumph when a melody came together just right, the quiet satisfaction of mastering a difficult piece. This was not the same as any of those moments, but it was connected. Every note she had ever played had led her here. The room had grown quieter. Conversations had faded into whispers, laughter had diminished, and a few people had stopped in their tracks to watch. She could feel their eyes, not pressing, but curious, expectant. No one spoke. She felt the weight of that silence and realized it was more intimidating than any criticism she had ever faced. And yet, within that stillness, she felt a strange sense of possibility. A faint thrill that perhaps this could be something extraordinary. She took a deep breath and positioned herself on the piano bench. Her fingers hovered over the keys, feeling their cold smoothness, recalling the sensation of each note and chord. She did not know what she would play yet. Improvisation was her strength, and she trusted her instincts. Slowly, she let her hands fall onto the keys, tentative at first, exploring the sound. The first notes were soft, careful, almost timid. But they carried a subtle beauty that began to draw the attention of the people in the room. A few heads turned fully toward her now, people who had been talking to each other just moments ago. They leaned slightly forward, curious, surprised, perhaps even a little skeptical. She did not notice them. Her mind focused entirely on the music, on the feel of the keys beneath her fingers, on the sound that emerged from the piano. She closed her eyes briefly, letting herself sink into the familiar rhythm and flow she had always found in playing. Each note, each chord seemed to release some of the tension in her body, replacing it with a quiet confidence she had not expected to feel in a room full of strangers. The music began to fill the space. Gentle at first. Then, with a little more strength, more emotion, the room changed almost imperceptibly. Conversations stopped entirely. People who had been mingling now stood still, drawn by the unexpected sound. Some raised their glasses, not in toast but unconsciously, as if acknowledging the presence of something remarkable. The air felt different, heavier with attention, but lighter in spirit. Her music had begun to weave itself into the atmosphere, and the room, which had moments ago seemed indifferent to her, was slowly leaning in to listen. She felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Fear, because she knew how quickly a performance could falter, how easily nerves could ruin everything. Exhilaration, because she was doing what she loved, and for the first time in a public space like this, it mattered. She could sense the room responding to her, not fully yet, but in subtle ways. A slight, quiet murmur here, a nod there, the eyes of a stranger widening as they absorbed the sound. She kept her focus, trusting her instincts, trusting the music that had carried her through so many private moments. Minutes passed, though they felt like an eternity. Her fingers moved with more confidence now, the melodies flowing more naturally. She began to feel a sense of connection with the space around her. The piano, once an object in the corner, became an extension of herself, a way to communicate without words, to tell a story that no one could ignore. She could feel the subtle shifts in energy, the way people leaned in, the way their expressions softened, the quiet amazement beginning to grow. In that moment, she realized that being put on the spot, the thing she had always feared most, had become an opportunity. The attention that had seemed unbearable at first was now a conduit, allowing her to share something deeply personal and beautiful with the world. She was no longer invisible, no longer just a helper in the background. She was present, fully, with every note she played. And though she did not yet know how the rest of the room would react, she understood that this moment was hers to shape, and she would not let it pass without giving everything she had. The first part of her journey had begun. Not with applause or recognition, but with a quiet declaration of her presence. She had been put on the spot, yes, but in that pressure, in that unexpected moment, she had found a way to step forward. The piano responded beneath her fingers, and the room, though not yet fully aware, began to shift. Something remarkable was starting. She felt it in the way the music moved through her hands, through the air, through the attention of everyone who had paused to listen. She had taken the first step into a moment that would change everything, and though she did not know it yet, the story of that night had already begun. The soft melody she had begun to play lingered in the air, almost like a whisper that begged for attention. At first, the people in the room were cautious. Some leaned forward, unsure if they were hearing what they thought they were. Others exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and polite disbelief. She noticed none of it. Her mind was entirely on the piano, on the feel of the keys beneath her fingers, on the vibration of sound as it traveled through the polished wood. But even as her confidence grew with each note, a subtle tension gnawed at the edges of her mind. Doubt settled in, small at first, barely noticeable, then growing louder with every passing second. She had played for herself so many times before, in private rooms, in quiet corners of her home, or under the soft glow of a desk lamp. But this was different. Here, the room was filled with strangers, people who could judge her, misunderstand her, or dismiss her entirely. They had not asked her to play. The moment had been thrust upon her unexpectedly. That weight, the weight of expectation from people who did not even know her, pressed down heavily on her chest, her hands, which had felt confident a moment ago, now hovered uncertainly over the keys. A thought crossed her mind. What if I make a mistake? What if they notice that I am not perfect? She had rehearsed in her head, imagined scenarios where she could falter, where the music could stumble from her fingers like water spilling over a ledge. The idea made her stomach twist. Her pulse quickened. She felt a bead of sweat form at her temple, and she pressed a hand to her forehead to steady herself. The first few notes had gone well, but the next chord caused a small slip. Her finger grazed the wrong key, producing a sound slightly off from the melody she intended. She froze, her mind racing. She could feel eyes on her, though she tried not to look. The room had fallen quieter now, as if everyone had collectively paused, waiting. A murmur of surprise rippled through a few guests, subtle but noticeable. She swallowed hard. Her chest felt tight. She had imagined this moment countless times, but none of her mental rehearsals had prepared her for the intensity of actual scrutiny. Her mind wavered between two conflicting urges. One part of her wanted to run, to retreat back into the shadows, to return to being unnoticed, where no one could question her. But another part, deeper and more persistent, urged her to stay, to continue, to trust the years of practice that had brought her to this moment. The music was not just sound, it was a part of her, a language she had been speaking for as long as she could remember. She could not let the fear of judgment silence her now. She drew in a slow, deliberate breath and let it out, her hands trembling slightly as they returned to the keys. This time she focused on something simple. The next chord, the next note, the immediate motion of her fingers. She could not control the audience, she realized. She could not control their expectations or their judgments. All she could control was the music in that moment, the sound she created, the story her hands told through the piano. With that thought, she began again. The music started soft, hesitant, almost cautious, but it grew steadier with each measure. Her hands moved more naturally now, remembering patterns and sequences ingrained over years of practice. The room responded in subtle ways. A few heads tilted, a hand paused mid-clink with a glass, a chair shifted as someone leaned forward. Even if they did not understand the technical mastery, they felt the emotion, the intent, the soul in the music. Yet doubt still lingered. She could feel it like a shadow trailing her every movement. Her mind whispered, "Are you sure you belong here? What if you fail? What if this is not enough?" She had faced these questions countless times in smaller moments, but never with such intensity, never with so many silent witnesses who could make or break her confidence. The challenge was not just the piano, but the invisible weight of eyes and whispers. The tension that seemed to wrap around her like a tightrope. As the music flowed, she became acutely aware of her breathing. Each inhale and exhale measured her focus. She realized that she had the power to let fear dominate her, or to let it fuel her performance. Slowly, she began to channel the nervous energy into the music itself, letting it shape the rhythm, the dynamics, the crescendos and pauses. Mistakes might happen, but she would continue. She would transform fear into expression. A faint smile tugged at her lips as the realization settled in. This was not about perfection. It was about presence, about being in the moment, about letting her hands communicate the story she carried inside her. And as she focused, she began to notice the subtle changes around her. The whispers stopped entirely. The polite murmurs faded. People who had been half-engaged moments ago were now fully attentive. Their eyes followed her hands as they moved, their heads slightly tilted, as if leaning into the sound. The room, which had moments ago seemed indifferent, was shifting, bending, leaning into her music. Still, the pressure remained. She was acutely aware of every potential mistake, every note that could falter, every rhythm that could stumble. Her heart pounded, not just from nervousness, but from the intensity of focus. Every chord, every melody line was a small battle, a negotiation between her fear and her desire to shine. She could feel the weight of the room pressing down, not harshly, but expectantly. And she realized that this moment was testing more than her skill. It was testing her courage. She remembered all the times she had doubted herself before. The small competitions where she had performed well but never won. The casual gatherings where she had played for friends who never really listened. The silent hours at home when she questioned whether her talent mattered at all. And she understood in that moment that those experiences had led her here. Every moment of hesitation, every small failure, every quiet practice session had built the foundation for this very performance. Her fingers glided over the keys with more confidence now, the music growing richer, more expressive. She allowed herself small moments of improvisation, delicate flourishes that were uniquely hers. The sound filled the room, resonating off the walls, weaving through the conversations that had not yet entirely died down. People turned fully now, abandoning their previous distractions. Their expressions shifted from curiosity to admiration, though some tried to hide it behind polite masks. She did not notice. She was no longer thinking about the audience as a source of fear. She was thinking of them as participants in a story that the piano was telling, and still, doubt lingered like a shadow. What if this ends too soon? What if they do not understand? What if it is not enough? She realized that these questions would not disappear completely, but they no longer held power over her. Instead, they became part of the music, the tension that gave each note more weight, each chord more meaning. She embraced the nervous energy, letting it pulse through her fingertips. Shaping the story she was telling, the room was completely quiet now, save for the piano. Even the staff who had been bustling moments ago paused, holding trays midair, captivated by the unexpected performance. She had become the center of attention, though she had not sought it. And yet she felt an unfamiliar thrill, a mixture of fear and exhilaration that made her heart beat faster and her mind clearer. The pressure of being put on the spot, which had seemed unbearable just moments ago, had transformed into a source of power. She could shape this moment, control it through her hands, and connect with every person in the room through the sound. She played on, letting the music flow naturally. Each note carried emotion, each chord expressed thought. The room shifted with her, the energy subtly changing as people leaned in, absorbed, and reacted in ways they could not fully control. Some were mesmerized, some intrigued, some moved in ways they did not expect. But all were present, fully, because of her. And she felt a sense of clarity she'd never experienced in public before. The first part of her performance had been tentative, cautious, a dance with fear and doubt. But now, she was stepping fully into the moment. She had survived the initial pressure, faced the scrutiny of strangers, and found a way to channel everything she felt into the music. The tension remained, yes, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was energizing, driving her fingers, shaping the flow of sound, guiding her through improvisation and expression as she continued to play. She realized that this was what it meant to perform. Truly perform, not just for herself but for others. To share a piece of her soul in a way that could not be ignored. And even though the final notes had not yet come, even though the room's reaction was still unfolding, she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had turned doubt into determination, pressure into focus, fear into expression. She had begun to transform an uncomfortable spotlight into a stage where she could shine, and in that transformation, in the subtle shift from hesitation to presence, she began to sense something extraordinary. This was more than a performance. It was a declaration, a statement that she belonged. Her talent mattered, that she could step forward even when the world seemed uncertain or doubtful. She had been put on the spot, yes, but she was no longer merely reacting. She was shaping the moment, owning it, letting the piano carry her courage and her artistry to everyone in the room. The first few notes of her music had already started to change the room. But now something deeper began to happen. The melodies she played were no longer tentative or cautious. They grew with a life of their own, carrying emotion she had not realized was waiting to be expressed. Every chord seemed to resonate not just through the piano, but through the entire hall. The air itself felt alive, charged with the sound, vibrating softly under the lights. People who had been standing in small groups, speaking quietly or laughing nervously, now turned fully toward her. Some paused mid-conversation, their heads slightly tilted, eyes widening as they absorbed the sound. Others stopped moving entirely, frozen by the unexpected depth of her playing. A few had put down drinks they had been carrying, glasses forgotten in hands that now rested at their sides. The subtle, almost invisible shifts in the crowd were impossible to miss. Her music had begun to pull the room into a shared experience. She played with a growing confidence, her fingers gliding effortlessly over the keys. She allowed herself to improvise, adding flourishes that came naturally, as if the piano itself were guiding her. Each note carried intention. Each chord carried feeling. She had played these keys countless times before, but never like this, never with such urgency and focus. She could feel the story unfolding under her hands, a story she had always kept to herself, now spilling into the room for everyone to witness. The audience reacted in ways she had never imagined. A woman near the front clasped her hands together, eyes closed, letting the music wash over her like a gentle wave. A man leaned forward, resting both elbows on the edge of a table, completely absorbed in the sound. Even the staff, who had been quietly working in the corners, paused to listen, mesmerized by the unexpected performance. The room, which had been indifferent or distracted just minutes before, was now entirely present, hanging on every note. And yet, despite the growing admiration, she did not lose herself in vanity or pride. Her focus remained on the piano, on the connection between her fingers and the keys, between the sound and the space. She felt the energy in the room, the subtle shifts in attention, the soft gasps and quiet murmurs of surprise, but she did not let it control her. Instead, she let it guide her, allowing the awareness of the audience to deepen the expression in her playing. The pressure that had once seemed overwhelming had transformed into something supportive, something that elevated her music. As she continued, the melodies became more complex, richer in texture. She experimented with rhythm, weaving slower, tender passages with faster, energetic bursts. The contrast created a sense of narrative, as if the piano were telling a story without words. People began to lean closer, instinctively drawn in by the unfolding drama of the music. Even those who had initially been skeptical, those who had not expected much from a stranger stepping up, were now fully engaged. Unable to look away, she could feel the subtle emotional currents in the room. A hush had fallen over the crowd, a quiet reverence that grew with every note. Some faces reflected awe, others wonder, a few even glimmered with tears. She had not intended to evoke such strong reactions, but the music had a life of its own, and she surrendered to it completely. Her heart beat in rhythm with the keys, her breathing in sync with the flow of sound. She was no longer just playing. She was communicating, expressing, sharing a part of herself that had always been hidden. The piano became more than an instrument. It became a voice, an extension of her emotions, a channel through which she could speak without words. She thought of the moments she had spent alone, practicing, learning, and perfecting her technique. All those hours had been preparation, not for applause or recognition, but for moments like this, where the music could reach out and touch others. And now, as she played, she realized that it was happening. The room had shifted entirely. The music had taken control. She noticed how the audience responded to the subtle dynamics, the rise and fall of the melody, the pauses that allowed the music to breathe. A slow, gentle section brought a few people to lean in closer, as if trying to catch every delicate nuance. A more powerful, dramatic passage made heads turn, eyes widen, and even draw in sharp breaths. She could feel the energy of the room rising, swirling around her, blending with her own excitement and focus. Each note was a conversation, each chord a declaration. The piano demanded her full attention, and she gave it willingly. Her fingers moved with speed and precision, yet also with grace, as if they were dancing across the keys. She felt completely absorbed, the outside world fading into the background. The lights, the chatter, the clinking glasses, all of it receded, leaving only her and the music. The audience had become part of the experience, witnesses to something unexpected, something that could not have been planned or anticipated. Some people tried to maintain their composure, but the effect of her playing was too strong. She could see smiles forming, eyebrows raising in surprise, even a few gasps escaping lips that had intended to remain silent. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them completely, as if it were a private moment shared in a public space. The contrast of reactions fascinated her in a quiet way. She realized that each person experienced the music differently, each response unique, yet all drawn by the same invisible force that flowed from the piano, despite the growing connection. The pressure never fully disappeared. She was aware of every eye, every expectation, every unspoken judgment. She knew that one wrong note, one faltering chord, could break the spell. And yet, she welcomed the challenge. The knowledge that the audience depended on her focus, that their attention was fully engaged, added urgency and purpose to her playing. She was no longer performing for herself alone. She was performing for a room full of strangers who, by choice or curiosity, had become part of her story. Her improvisation grew more daring, more expressive. She explored the extremes of the piano, from the lowest, most resonant keys to the delicate, high notes that seemed to float in the air. Each shift in tone, each variation in tempo, added layers to the music, deepening the emotional impact. She felt a thrill in her chest, a combination of fear, excitement, and pure joy. This was what she had been preparing for, without even knowing it. This was what her music had been waiting for, a room full of people ready to listen, to be moved, to be captivated. The room seemed to shrink around her. It was no longer a large hall filled with strangers. It was a single, unified space, alive with sound and attention. The boundaries between performer and audience blurred. She felt their presence, their reactions, their awe, but not as judgment, rather, as participation. The music was no longer hers alone. It was theirs too, shared in a quiet, profound understanding that transcended words. She noticed the subtle shifts in posture, the soft nods, the involuntary movements of people swaying slightly to the rhythm. A few whispered to each other, unable to contain their amazement. But even those whispers were hushed, as if the sound of her piano commanded silence. She felt a surge of responsibility, knowing that the spell she had woven depended on every note, every pause, every subtle nuance of her performance. But she did not falter. She embraced the weight, letting it guide her hands, letting it shape the story she told through the keys. Time seemed to distort. Minutes passed, but they felt like seconds. The music flowed seamlessly, a continuous narrative without beginning or end, only the story she created in the moment. Her heart beat in sync with the rhythm, her mind attuned to the subtleties of each chord, the dynamics of each phrase. She felt alive in a way that transcended fear, transcended doubt. She was no longer just a person playing the piano. She was a storyteller, a conduit, force that transformed a room full of strangers into a captivated audience. And then she noticed the faces closest to the piano. Their expressions had changed completely. Surprise had melted into admiration, curiosity into wonder, skepticism into awe. People who had not expected much were now leaning forward, fully present, hanging on every note. Even those who had been distracted before now sat or stood in quiet focus, as if caught in a spell. She realized that this was the moment she had always dreamed of, even if she had not known it. The music had taken over, and the room was hers, not in possession, but in shared experience. Her performance continued to build, crescendoing into passages of breathtaking intensity. Each note carried more than sound. It carried emotion, intent, story. People felt it in different ways, some with tears forming in their eyes, some with a lump in their throat, some with a quiet smile of recognition that they were witnessing something rare. The energy in the room was electric, yet gentle, a living, breathing entity shaped entirely by her music. And through it all, she felt a quiet, steady joy. She had begun this journey with hesitation, with fear, with doubt, but those feelings had been transformed, refined by the act of creating, by the necessity of focus, by the willingness to embrace the moment fully. She was no longer just responding to the situation. She was shaping it, guiding it, letting it evolve naturally. The piano was her partner, the room her witness, and the music her language, as the final section of this part of the performance approached. She allowed herself one last flourish, a sequence of notes that rose and fell, echoed and lingered, filling every corner of the hall. The sound resonated in the air, in the walls, in the hearts of everyone present. She felt it, a deep, satisfying connection. A sense that she had reached the core of the room's attention, had touched something inside each listener that went beyond words or expectation. And in that moment, she knew something undeniable. She had been put on the spot, yes. She had faced doubt, pressure, and fear. But she had also discovered the power within herself to overcome it, to transform it into something beautiful, something that could move people, something that could take over a room entirely. The journey was far from over, but this part of it had been hers, fully, completely. Unforgettably, the room had changed completely now. Where moments ago people had been polite, curious, or even skeptical, now every single person seemed caught in the music. There was no talking, no wandering attention, no distraction. The piano filled the space in a way that went beyond sound. It was almost tangible. It's like a force that drew everyone closer, a thread connecting hearts and minds. Her fingers moved over the keys with both grace and strength, each note deliberate, each chord resonant, carrying the energy of everything she had felt, feared, and hoped for. She was no longer aware of herself in the same way she had been earlier. The nervousness, the doubt, the fear of being judged, they had not disappeared completely, but they had transformed into something sharper, clearer, more intense. She felt alive in every sense of the word, her awareness heightened, tuned to every subtle change in the room, every sigh, every intake of breath, every shift in posture. It was as if the audience was not just watching her. They were breathing with her, listening with her, moving with her through the rises and falls of the music. She began a section that was slower, tender, almost fragile. Her fingers danced lightly over the higher keys, producing soft, delicate notes that seemed to hang in the air. A hush fell over the audience, deeper than before. Even those who had been standing at the back leaned forward, straining to catch every nuance. Some closed their eyes, letting the music flow through them without distraction. Others watched intently, mouths slightly open, captivated by a performance that seemed to have emerged from nowhere yet demanded complete attention. Her heart swelled with a mixture of exhilaration and humility. She had been put on the spot, yes, but in that pressure, she had discovered something she had never fully realized before. Her ability to not just play music, but to move people, to shape the energy in a room, to make strangers feel something together, at the same time, in the same space. It was intoxicating, powerful, and terrifying all at once. Yet, she trusted herself, trusted the piano, trusted the story that was emerging under her hands. She shifted to a more dramatic passage, the music rising with intensity. Her fingers struck the keys with force and precision, the sound filling every corner of the hall. People leaned closer, drawn in by the crescendo, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. The room seemed to vibrate with the energy she produced. Glasses rattled slightly on tables, though no one noticed or cared. The audience was absorbed entirely, as if the music had formed an invisible current that carried everyone along. She allowed herself to close her eyes briefly, feeling the sound rather than seeing it, listening to the way the room responded. Each note seemed to echo. Each chord lingered in the air longer than she expected. She felt connected, not just to the piano, but to the room itself, to the people in it. She could sense their reactions without looking. The gasps, the widened eyes, the subtle leaning forward, all of it informed the music, guided the flow, helped her shape the story she was telling. And then came the softer moments, the ones that made the audience lean in almost instinctively. Her fingers traced gentle arpeggios, delicate and precise, like droplets of water falling into a still pool. The contrast with the dramatic passages made the quieter sections even more moving. Some people's eyes glistened with emotion, others held their breath. She could feel their anticipation, their emotional involvement, and she let it guide her without hesitation. She was not playing for recognition or praise anymore. She was playing to express, to connect, to share a piece of herself with the room. The energy in the hall had shifted entirely. What had been polite curiosity became fascination. What had been quiet attention became engagement. And what had been subtle appreciation became palpable emotion. She noticed a few people exchanging glances, whispering softly, but even these murmurs were drowned in the music's impact. Everyone seemed drawn into the same current, moving together through the rises and falls of the performance. She could feel the subtle emotional waves passing through the audience, responding in unison, even if they were unaware of it. Her confidence grew with every measure. She explored the full range of the piano, from the lowest resonant keys to the sparkling highs that lingered in the air. Each note was deliberate, each passage carefully shaped, yet she allowed for spontaneity, improvisation that came from instinct and feeling rather than strict planning. The music was alive, evolving with her, changing in response to the room's energy, guiding it and being guided in return. She had stepped onto this unexpected stage without preparation. But now she felt perfectly in control, perfectly present, perfectly aligned with the moment. She noticed the subtle reactions of the audience more keenly now. Some were leaning forward on the edges of their seats, completely absorbed. Some had tears quietly forming, their faces flushed with emotion. Others were nodding slowly, heads swaying with the rhythm, their bodies unconsciously moving to the music. A few stood motionless, hands clasped in front of them, mesmerized by the beauty and power of what they were hearing. Even the staff, who had been rushing around moments ago, were now frozen in place, caught up in the moment. Holding trays as if afraid to break the spell, the room was no longer just a hall filled with strangers. It was a shared space of emotion, of connection, of awe. Every chord she played reinforced this bond, every melody strengthened it. She realized that the music had taken on a life of its own, shaping the atmosphere in a way that went beyond anything she could have imagined. She was no longer just a performer. She was a conduit, a storyteller, force that transformed the energy of a room entirely. Even the air itself seemed to hum with sound, every vibration reverberating through the space, filling every corner, reaching every listener. The impact was subtle, yet profound. Some people closed their eyes completely, letting the music wash over them, while others remained focused, watching her hands with rapt attention. The room, which had been casual, polite, and somewhat distracted when she first arrived, had now become a sacred space of shared experience. Created entirely by the power of her performance, she allowed herself to be swept along with the music, letting intuition and feeling guide her fingers. She no longer worried about mistakes or judgment. Those concerns had been replaced by a quiet awareness of presence, of responsibility, of connection. Every chord, every sequence, every pause had meaning. The audience responded unconsciously to her energy, and she responded to theirs, in an unspoken dialogue that required no words. Only the music and its resonance in the hearts of those who listened. The crescendos rose higher and higher, powerful yet controlled, dramatic yet precise. She could feel the emotion building in the room, the shared breath of the audience, the rising tension that demanded resolution. She shaped the finale carefully, balancing energy and softness, intensity and reflection. Every note became a brushstroke, painting a picture across the space, telling a story that could not be ignored. And then, just as the music reached its peak, she shifted to a delicate, reflective section. The room leaned in instinctively, anticipating the next movement, absorbing the contrast between power and gentleness. Her fingers glided across the keys like wind over water, creating a sound that was soft, delicate, and hauntingly beautiful. A few people held their breath entirely, as if even the smallest sound would break the moment. She could feel the collective heartbeat of the room, perfectly in tune with the flow of the music. It's perfectly connected in a way she had never experienced before. The audience's emotions were fully engaged. There was no longer curiosity, no skepticism, no doubt. Only attention, only presence, only awe. People were affected in ways they could not always articulate, some with tears, some with smiles, some with a quiet shaking of the head. Unable to comprehend how someone could suddenly create something so beautiful and moving. She had become the center of this experience, yet she felt no sense of ego. She was a medium, a bridge, a channel for expression. The piano, once an object of wood and strings, had become an extension of her very being. The music was a reflection of her courage, her skill, her emotion, her journey. And in turn, the audience became an extension of the music. Their responses, their presence, their reactions, shaping the performance as much as she shaped it. It was a delicate, invisible partnership. A shared moment that could not be replicated. A fleeting miracle that existed only in that room at that time. With those people, as the final measures approached, she allowed herself one more sequence of bold, expressive chords, powerful yet lyrical, dramatic yet intimate. The music swelled, filling the space completely, resonating through the walls, through the air, through the hearts of everyone present. She felt it, the collective impact, the way her notes had moved the audience, had captured them, had transformed the room entirely. This was the culmination of everything she had felt, feared, and hoped for, condensed into a single, brilliant expression. And in that moment, as the final notes faded and lingered in the air like a memory, she felt a profound sense of triumph. She had been put on the spot. She had faced doubt, pressure, and fear. And yet, through the music, she had created something extraordinary. The room had been transformed, the audience moved, and she had discovered the full depth of her own power and potential. The silence after the final note was almost as powerful as the music itself. The audience remained still for a heartbeat, collectively holding their breath, absorbing the impact of what they had just experienced. Then, slowly, quietly, one clap rose from the front of the room. Another joined it, then another, and soon the entire hall erupted in applause, cheers, and exclamations of awe. The transformation was complete. She had taken control, not with force or demand, but with artistry, courage, and the power of her music. The final notes had faded, leaving the room in a rare and breathtaking silence. It was not the absence of sound that caught her attention, but the weight of the stillness, the collective pause of every person present. The air felt electric, charged with the emotions that lingered from her performance. Her fingers rested lightly on the keys, but she no longer heard the piano. She only felt the room, the energy, the moment itself, as if it were suspended in time. She took a breath, a slow, steady inhale, trying to ground herself after the intensity of what had just occurred. Her heart was still racing, not from fear, not from doubt, but from exhilaration. She had done what she had come to do, though she had not known it at the start of the night. She had shared herself, her talent, her courage, and now the room was alive with the reaction. It was overwhelming, yet deeply satisfying. A mixture of relief, pride, and gratitude that she could hardly describe. Then the applause began. One person clapped, tentative at first, as if unsure how to express the awe they felt. It was quickly followed by another and another, until the room erupted into a wave of sound. The applause was thunderous, reverent, and heartfelt, the kind that fills the chest with warmth and pride. She felt her own lips curve into a small, incredulous smile. She had not expected this, not so fully, not so completely. The strangers who had seemed indifferent or doubtful only moments before were now on their feet, cheering, clapping, and showing their admiration in the most genuine ways. Tears threatened to fall, but she blinked them back, focusing instead on the faces around her. She saw amazement, surprise, respect, and even joy reflected in the eyes of those who had watched her. Some faces were flushed with excitement, others glistened with emotion, and a few had subtle, quiet smiles that seemed almost private, even in a room full of people. For the first time, she felt truly seen, not just as someone who could play, but as someone who could move others, who could transform a space with her presence. A few people approached her, hesitating at first, unsure how to express themselves. "That was incredible," one whispered, almost shyly. Another nodded vigorously, words failing them entirely. Some simply offered a hand, a gesture of respect and admiration, which she accepted with quiet gratitude. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she had rarely experienced in public. Recognition, true recognition, was a strange and wonderful thing, especially when it had come from unexpected quarters. She realized that the moment was bigger than herself. It was about connection, about shared experience, about the invisible thread that had formed between her and the audience. Each note she had played, each chord she had struck, had been a conversation, a story, a bridge that connected her world to theirs. And now, as they responded with applause, admiration, and emotion, she understood the power of music not just as sound, but as communication, as expression, as transformation.